Hey, welcome to People Who Design. I'm Cam Kress, and I meet with designers and product people about the ins and outs of their work. This week, I'm joined by my friend and designer Tommy Hung. He's the founding designer at a company called Monaco. It's a venture-backed startup company that just came out of stealth mode. They're backed by Founders Fund, and we dove into what it takes to be a founding designer, how he's using AI to support a team of 20 engineers as a single designer on the team, how he's thinking about scaling and keeping up with the demand of understanding users and informing design decisions from that. So we kind of dove into the philosophy of design and how it's changing in this AI-driven landscape, and down to the tactical screen sharing on how he's actually using it to inform decision making and making actual high quality design from it. So it was a really good conversation with a good friend, and I hope you enjoy it as well. Let's get into it. Tommy Hung, how you doing, man?
Cameron, great seeing you.
Good to see you as well. Yeah, it's probably been 10 years since we worked together last. So yeah, it's good to see your face.
Yeah. Like we were saying earlier, you look exactly as I remember you.
Nice.
Hopefully, I look close to what I looked like back then too.
Yeah, yeah. Hopefully the time hasn't aged us that much.
Yeah, a lot of other things have aged me a little bit, but the time itself is not too bad.
Yeah, it's actually funny. Like we actually started at the same company together in 2015, Bisque Education, and that was my first like corporate job going in. Prior to that, it was like agencies and startups, and yeah, that we went through that experience together, which was fun.
Yeah, yeah. It was a learning. It was definitely a lot of learning going through that while designing for learning.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. So thank you so much for meeting with me. Yeah, I wanted to kick in to just like what you've been doing over the last 10 years and kind of getting it up to your current role today. I'm super interested in learning from industry experts now that the craft of design has changed so much over the last 10 years, and it's been this massive transition. And really, I just set up this podcast to learn from people and learn from industry people and how you're adapting, how you're changing. So maybe we just start with your background story and quickly, how'd you get into design? When we first met, you were a researcher and you made that transition into being a product designer. But yeah, maybe we start there and kind of dive into the story.
Sounds good. Yeah, so like you said, I started out in research. I went to university for psychology and neuroscience, and I was studying a lot of uh, child development behavior, and it led me to, after graduating, moving to China, going really deep on researching children born with HIV earlier on in their lives, and because of that, how they had to deal with a lot of really intense developmental issues. And we did this study with this nonprofit over 2.5 years, and we basically found a couple of things. But the things that really stood out for what I was doing was that when these children were really young, they were developing severe mood disorders because there's a disconnect between like how society viewed their parents versus how their parents viewed them. Like everyone basically thought their parents were like in a very bad people, and so they developed this weird sense of self, which was really skewed from really early on. But we learned that there was like a really effective therapy for them if you were able to start doing with them really early on, around like 2 to 3 years old. Um, but the problem was that all of this therapy had to be done in person, face to face, for it to be sort of effective. And so it was very hard to scale actually providing therapy to these children. And so what we did is we worked with a local agency to try to design a iOS application to do a portion of that therapy with people directly. And I was heavily involved in the research that went into how that therapy application is created, but also some of the design. And I became really, really interested in designing from that experience. Like it was a mix of like my background in like behavioral sciences, plus my I had always really enjoyed design before, but like I didn't know that you could take sort of behavioral scientists and combine it with like designing things. And so that was like sort of like my first experience where I was like, oh wow, it'd be really cool to think about how to design for people.
Wow.
That therapy research program sort of closed out, and I took a step back and I thought about what was the things that I want to do, if I wanted to actually continue in research, or if something else stood out to me. And I thought that design would be a really interesting path forward. So I came back to the States, and I ended up just sort of like asking around the people that I knew, like who was like designer that I should go talk to. Who are the people that are like the best in the industry? And I found a couple people. Amongst them, one of them was our friend Paul Hershey, who at that time was a I think just joined Code School, a startup in Orlando at the time, and they had just been acquired by Pluralsight. So Code School and Pluralsight were both platforms for teaching code development, especially people who don't come from traditional engineering backgrounds. And so Paul and I talked, and he was really interested in my behavioral science and research background, and I was really interested in design. And so he brought me on as an intern at Code School. I was more focused on sort of user research. There's a lot of carry through from the research I was doing in the field, and like how you should be doing user research. And so I started as a user researcher and sort of like learned design as I was doing the research. So that was my first internship, and then from there, Paul was invited to join Bisq, where you and I met there,
Yeah.
and that was my first like real official gig, like you said, also in like a real corporate environment. And so um, that was a great learning experience. How to really talk to like tons of different people and tons of different parts of the company. It was a lot of learning about how much of design is about socializing what actually has to be built and like learning from people, and it's not just like pixels on the screen. So then from there, I wanted to go basically into like what I felt was like a training camp. And so I wanted to switch over to the agency side, because on agency side you can like move really, really fast. You can like work with a ton of different industries really fast. And I thought that was the best way to learn, is not to really go super deep into one in-house product, just because so much of the work is around socializing that you have to do. It felt like there is a longer process. Whereas when you're an agency, you have a project, you can just like you have a short timeline, you can execute on quickly. So I spent about 2 years at Purple Rock Scissors,
They're
and
great. Yeah. I love their work is amazing.
yeah, they were one of the bigger and well-known agencies in Orlando at the time, and they had a good mix of working with like local companies, like local healthcare companies, other verticals, and working with larger Silicon Valley companies. And so it was a nice spread of different types of work that I gained over there. Uh, I spent about 2 years there in a mixed like UX designer, digital strategist sort of role, and then after 2 years, it felt like it was right to go back in house again. I wanted to have a little more like long term scope and impact rather than sort of bouncing around. And so I moved out here, Silicon Valley, and I thought about like it was the right path to join a larger company or a startup. And I wanted to give working on an area that like was closer to my heart a try at a smaller company. And so I joined this company called Quartzy. Quartzy was a lab procurement management platform. They basically allowed scientists to like quickly get like really hard to get supplies rapidly on a single platform. The old way that people would do it is that they'd have this like procurement manager. They'd write all this stuff on like their whiteboard of like what they need to do their experiments, and then they had this lab manager go and they would like order from like 50 different like platforms. And it was like a huge bottleneck and actually being able to do research fast. When I was still in the research phase, this was like a huge bottleneck that I felt that like waiting for supplies was like the dumbest reason why you couldn't do research.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, I joined as the third designer at the time. The company had just gotten a big round of funding, and we were like building out our basically our own supply chain for them. So I ended up being there for 3 years. The last year and a half, I was the only designer, which is like my first taste of like really owning sort of end to end, working closely with the founders. Owning all of design from brand to product all the way down. And at first, I didn't think I would like it. I was like, man, I
Doing
really
everything.
all this.
Yeah.
Yeah, my mentality at the time was like, I always want to go work with like a large design team and have people that are better than me and learn from them. Um, but through things that were out of my control, I ended up being the only designer, and I actually felt that that was a different sort of learning experience, where it was like I was learning not as much about pixels, but a lot about how businesses worked, a
Mm.
lot about what mattered to founders and key stakeholders. And so, kind of going back to the BISC thing, it was kind of like, design is always a mix of product management sort of things where you're managing what is actually important to build, why you should build it, and then also like communicating, and then the actual design itself. And so, I felt like I grew a lot from that experience, and that's probably why after Quartzy, I've sort of always leaned towards smaller companies overall. After Quartzy, I bounced around thinking about what's the right company where I might be a founding designer at. I didn't find exactly what I was looking for, but I ended up from there going to Coinbase for a little while, and I worked on their onboarding. Um, and then from Coinbase, I joined Coda. Coda is a similar tool to Notion where it is a document sort of platform, but you have all these primitives where like it's not just text. You can like make databases and their tables, etc. And it's like a very malleable sort of software.
Mm-hmm.
To this day, I think malleable software is like a incredibly interesting, important thing to design for, where the user has way more control over how they build their own platforms. And so I was there on the business platform team. I worked a lot on thinking about how to get customers, and then from there how to grow customers. And so it was a mix of growth design and a mix of sort of like prototyping newer parts of the platform outside of the core product.
Mm-hmm.
And after that, I bounced back again to a smaller company called Equals. Equals, it was really interesting. The metaphor from Coda was that like, it used the document as its central interaction platform. Equals did this with a spreadsheet where it's like, how do I quickly and easily pull data from tons of all different sources that I need to understand how the business works, put it onto one platform, and then either manipulate it myself or use AI to help me figure out like how to manipulate the data that's coming in. And I
Mm-hmm.
thought that was like, the spreadsheet is one of the most commonly used platforms. Spreadsheet formula language is the most common programming language, and it's like, how can you redesign something that is so fundamental to how software works, given how AI is starting to evolve and how people can find new ways to use it. Um, from the thing with equals was that I learned from that experience that uh, I originally really liked the whole work from home idea, but like when you're in a small, fast paced company, it actually introduces a lot of friction where it's like uh, just going up and talking to someone just has so much faster speed than trying to figure out what time on their calendar you can actually find talk to them, and then you end up spending a day because everyone is remote and you can't just walk up to somebody. And so I wanted to join a company where I was actually in the office most of the time, which I didn't think I would want to do. But after COVID and after sort of working from home a good amount of time, I wanted to sort of be like live in person.
That's cool. Yeah,
So
I mean, it does feel isolated sometimes just working remote by yourself. That's a really good point. It's like, so it's hard to, in almost like it feels like you're interrupting people when
yeah,
you're working remote. Sometimes it's like you ping someone to like have a quick chat, but it feels disruptive versus like you said, like walking up to them. Yeah, maybe we should pull on that thread a little bit on just like work
yeah.
behaviors too.
Yeah, like even being in the office, like you can just see people. You can see how busy they are, or like if you're walking by to get water or something and they look like they have like space to talk, you start chatting with them. And a lot of times it just like turns into better ideas for what you're working on without it feeling forced, I guess. I think the other thing is just like when you work remote, you're sort of only talking to your teammates because it's very pragmatic. You're like,
Mm.
you don't want to bother people that are working on things that are not directly related to what you're working on. So it's like, I'm not going to schedule a meeting with someone that's working on something completely different. But when you're in office, you overhear things. There's a lot of more cross pollination, and I think that like that ambient knowledge you gain from sort of hearing how people are talking about their projects, a lot of times you can pull disparate inspiration from like what the other team is doing without necessarily having to be talking to them one to one, but just like being near them helps a lot. I think those are huge advantages of being in person.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Yeah, for sure. The cross pollination. I mean, I think in some cases too is like there's multiple teams, especially in the larger companies. There's multiple teams kind of working on the same problem, and they don't even know it. You know, it's like there's a lot of that going on too. But yeah, so you wanted to go back, so you're working remote, and then that's what you were kind of seeking out with this kind of new path was trying to get back in face to face environments and more collaborative, like physical whiteboards behind you. You know.
Yeah, yeah. The whiteboard I think will never go away in the design process, which I personally find like nothing really beats just jumping on and just like sketching stuff on a whiteboard.
Yeah, absolutely.
Uh, yeah, yeah. So one of my friends uh, basically connected me with the company that I'm at now. They were looking for a founding designer at the time, and the opportunity I thought was really interesting. So I'm at Monaco right now. We just launched our in public beta, I think 2.5 months ago. I think in March, and so now we are actually real, like Pinocchio. We're out in the world with a real product. But I joined about a year and a half ago. We had been working in stealth for about a year, just building the platform. Some of the core things that brought me to the team were just how experienced the founders were, and so it was a seed stage startup, but the four founders all had very deep experience, knowledge, domain knowledge in the space that they were working in, and the early team that I saw was just like extremely talented, and so I was super excited to
Nice.
be a person with that kind of environment.
That's awesome. So Monaco, so it's a VC backed by Founders Fund, right?
That's right.
So what does Monaco do? What does the product do?
Yeah, so Monaco is a sales and revenue platform in that it is foundationally, meant to encapsulate a lot of what customer relationship management platform does, where you have records of all of the potential people and the people that you are in the sales pipeline process with. But traditionally the tool set in sales is you have your Salesforce or CRM or HubSpot, which is basically just a giant database of all these people that you might be speaking with, and a lot of it's manual, just like entry to go manage all of this stuff. And then on top of this, you have a tool for outbounding to increase your demand, reaching out to people that fit your ideal customer profile. You have tools for cold calling, all these different ways to try to get people to want to talk to you. And then you have platforms for video calling. There's like 10 different point solution tools that are just connected via some sort of API to your CRM. And so what happens is that like this sales process from top to bottom is just disjointed and broken up into tons of different tools. And so data is messy across this entire platform. And it's a very data foundational sort of product where like to understand how to like do the job well, you need to like understand these people and their customers and what makes them people worth selling to, right? So Monaco's first bet is that like we should create a platform that has all of the most important parts of these tools, not necessarily like the entire Gong suite of tools, but the thing that makes Gong essential to the sales process, which is like the video recording, notes, pulling it back, taking out takeaways, understanding
Mm-hmm.
what you're doing, the outbound part of it, reaching out to customers in a way that doesn't just spam all of them, and putting it onto one platform. And that foundation means that you now have an integrated data layer from like first prospect all the way down to close one where you have the customers. And from there, you can start understanding what's working well in a way that you can't do with the other tools. And so the second part of the bet is with this integrated data across these different touch points, um, AI can do a lot more with that. And over time, as the data compounds, AI hopefully gets much, much better at helping you not only do the things, but interpreting what's working well, what's not working well.
Interesting. Yeah. So how did you mentioned being in stealth mode for a year, right? What was that process like in terms of like how would you identify customers' pain points, and how much were you kind of in the field trying to understand who the ideal kind of user set was, and how to kind of establish a product market fit leading up to the release? Like, what was the design process like there?
Yeah, yeah. So our initial hypothesis for who our ideal customer is tech startup founders, and with like these sort of sales tools, uh, when you become more mature, you usually start investing in like your first CRM, and it is much more difficult for someone who has invested in like the 4 or 5 tools that they start with sales to like then go and replace them with a different tool. It's just a lot of
Hmm.
overhead. So it made a lot of sense to start with early founders. One, because they don't really have a fully in like tool stack where they're using a bunch of stuff, and they're much more open to adapting a new tool. The second is that a lot of these founders are more technical founders. A lot of them are engineering, and so they're still exploring how to do sales as they're growing their company. It's like one of their like 20 jobs that they're trying to learn to do, and
Yeah, I
necessarily doing
imagine.
it the best way that they can. So with our platform, like I had mentioned, because we have such experienced founders, we definitely have put some of what works well for sales into the platform itself.
Hmm.
And we have also hired a really strong sort of go-to-market team ourselves of like really senior expert sales and customer success people who are also sort of like there to support these founders. And so the we basically found that the best niche is early companies that are actually starting to like heavily think about how sales works. Um, Part of this was already the thesis that we knew from the founder's own experience. Our CPO was previously at Apollo, which is a well-known tool for prospecting and also a database. And so from his learnings there, he brought a lot of experience about what the right starting place was. Our CEO was a CRO at Brex. He like was part of the initial team, and he basically helped drive them up to their highest point of success. So they came with a lot of experience. We because of that we could do a little less customer feedback earlier on. There were just like some things that were just foundational that needed to be done that like were no questions asked. We would do user tests and whatnot earlier on just to make sure we weren't creating completely different things, but we did heavily lean on sort of that experience for a lot of the initial thinking. um, Once we got to a point where we had sort of the core features to be able to do sales from like outbound the other way down to close, then we started bringing on beta customers, and we sort of brought them in slowly over time, so they were actually using the platform. And then
Nice.
that was really valuable because instead of just asking them to look at screens and suggest what they might possibly do, that we would get like real feedback, like this thing is broken, I can't move forward unless you like help me fix it. And so that plus like a really active engineering team who was like really on top of every time customer feedback came in, we tried to move on it within the day of like that made it so there was less need for, I mean, there were like larger projects where there were blue sky. We're not sure how these things work. Those need a lot of customer impact, but the like foundational sort of customer just tells us what's not working, us collecting it and then just like quickly iterating help resolve a lot of the need to constantly have the as a designer talking directly to customers, because we could see what they were doing and we could understand just by their own context of using the product early on what was going on from there.
That's cool. Yeah, I think we're in a completely new world. I mean, when design was almost like segregated into its own role and going through the whole stages of the design process of designing a prototype and trying to get customer feedback, I feel like that has just completely blurred the lines where now we can just build the thing, put it in front of people and see what they do. Really, the observational research is probably better than just contextual kind of user setting, especially in Figma prototypes. Like I think the AI has unlocked complete new possibilities in that. So how would you kind of go between, you mentioned like the value of being at a smaller startup company, maybe wearing multiple hats, you going from brand design to product design to user research to even like a product manager in some cases, right? Like you're making product decisions as well. How did you kind of balance your time across those segments? Like how do you think about that?
Uh, I think it's definitely hard, but that's part of the chaos and beauty of being an early startup is that there's always something to do beyond just what you're doing right now. I think it's
Yeah.
like a lot of thinking about like what is the most high leverage thing that you can do. Part of it's just like we have two designers. We're hiring a third designer right now. We have like 20 something engineers. And so like most often the highest leverage thing that I can do is to be designing just because there's just not that many designers. But when there's parts where decisions are unclear, or there's a back and forth on like technical design versus like we should be prioritizing, then like it makes sense to jump in and help sort of take on the product management hat there, understanding sort of like what is the not only just like the initial feature, but what is like the next month's roadmap and how does this thing fit into the overall plan versus is there something else that can be done where there's a similar set of things that we need to accomplish, but maybe it can be done better in a long-term vision. And then I think it's like what you were mentioning around like with AI, you can move really fast. Sometimes it's like when you're just looking at a doc of written text, it's a very different experience than like throwing together a prototype and actually like clicking around and seeing like, okay, I don't think we actually need this. This is
Yeah.
cool, but like we don't actually need this for launch, or like this would actually be really valuable to customers if we like tried this, even though it's not the most important thing in scope. This like experience would like be a huge boost. Like those things are hard to determine when you're just looking at specs and requirements.
Absolutely. I've been on a personal rampage against agile for years now, I think, but mostly recently it just doesn't, the dogmatic practices of it just don't make sense anymore. Like you said, it's like, where do these requirements even come from? I'm constantly questioning those things. And it's way easier to be like, once when you kick off a project, there's always things that come about where you're like, oh, actually this is actually could be solving the problem better than what we originally thought and actually wrote down beforehand. How do you guys kind of manage that process today? Being at a startup, like I miss those days. But going from like maybe the founder or the founding team has an idea, how does that get translated to design and then to engineering? 20 engineers to one designer seems like a pretty steep ratio. So how do you kind of work across the team?
Uh, it's a good question. I think I think there are a couple things. One is by being in the office, I think is you can move faster by I think meeting culture is one of those things where it's like it's a very thin line between having an unnecessary meeting, having a productive meeting. And I think that when done right, if you're able to get the right people in the room and everyone can just give like the core parts of the feedback that matter, especially people that are not directly on the project but are related in other parts of the project, and they can expose some information about what they're working on that actually impacts what you're doing at that point in time where the stakeholders are in the room, instead of like this like broken chain of communication where you have a small meeting and then you have to talk to six other people. That actually can save a ton of time, is to just quickly gather context, to get stakeholder opinion in that moment, and that can sort of like help you understand, okay, do I need to actually like think about this anymore than what we need to do at this moment, or can I like put this somewhere and like park it for a while and come back to it? That really helps with scoping what is the actual important thing to figure out. So that's number
Mm-hmm.
one, I think. And I think the second thing is just like being constantly with the engineers, prototyping and actually working in code or understanding how some of the stuff works, helps a lot with like, you know, not having to wait for engineers to go and like spec out how long it's going to take to build this thing, but you
Yeah.
sort of like talk about it like there,
Yeah.
just like show them this cool thing that you're thinking about, and they're just like, no, I mean, that's cool, but like that's going to be like a lot of work, and then you can just be like, oh, but what is it like? What is it like a good? What does a good place look like directly in a conversation versus, like you said, the sort of process where like you go present this at a discovery meeting, and then the engineers go and like think about a tech design. 3 days later, they come back with like this entire thing, and it's just you have to go back and forth. Like a lot of those small decisions said in in the moment where you're thinking about it ends up saving a chunk of like back and forth.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. I think every company is trying to figure this out, especially larger ones. I'm at Paramount now, and it's a massive organization, and there's so many different teams that are working on different products, and there's like this like kind of just discovery mode of like where like how do we change the processes to enable that direct communication instead of this like structure where we have to like do it through a team, and like you said, like the engineers will scope it, and like how do we just break down those walls and get closer together. And yeah, it's an interesting place to be, because like the spectrum of design now is like there's some designers that can just ship PRs now. They're closer to the code side of it, and then there's designers that are trying to get more out in front of it. It's like trying to decide what we should design and build, what problems are worth solving. So I think it's like this broad spectrum of going back and forth between those two modalities, which is an interesting time. But one thing you mentioned, before we talked about doing this, was that really stood out to me was that you said that the execution of design and building is getting easier than ever. I think Claude code team just said that 90% of their code is now written by Claude. So engineers even are writing less manual code, and so that end of the spectrum is getting a lot easier. But what's harder is the more upstream process. So maybe you could dig into that a little bit. I thought that was really fascinating, like just trying to decide what's worth to build, and what problems to go after. Like how are you thinking about that more upstream design phase?
Yeah, yeah. Like you mentioned, I think that AI is impacting all of us, but it's been interesting seeing how AI has impacted design. I think the way that I would sort of categorize the range of work that designer, especially a designer early stage company, is doing is like the initial like understanding is what's should we build, why should we build it, like this what's the impact of building this stuff, right? Then there's like the actual ideation phase where you're thinking about like, okay, like what is the right sort of model to design for here. And then there's like the pixel level phase and the implementation phase. And I think that different designers across that range focus on different things. I think people closer to like the design engineer role are very execution focused, trying to like make the best interaction, try to like write clean code. And they're sort of like engineers with like very high level of taste. And then I think on the other side is like designers who are maybe closer to product managers, maybe a little bit closer to strategists, and they're thinking about not only what should be built, but like, is there a new framework that we can do here other than like an existing interaction model or something? And the latter, the execution part, I think has gotten much better. I think partly because of how good AI has gotten at code.
Yeah.
Uh, and it's like you can spin up prototypes really quickly now, and like if you want to, you can actually make it something that you can just push directly into your code base if you're good enough with the code. And even more so, like maybe you don't even have to be good at code, if as long as you have the right sort of lint rules and things that like make sure you're not just throwing slop in there. A lot of non-technical people are able to ship things that they couldn't before. But I think the part that is actually a little more interesting to me is like using AI as sort of a thought partner earlier on. And so recently I've been sort of building out a personal knowledge base of like what my opinions are on design. And then I'll also have like Claude go research like industry patterns and like sort of build framing around different ways that I can consider these problems earlier on. And so I have this sort of like process where I'm pulling in context from all of our business tools from Notion. If there's any like PRDs being written, I'll pull it in. I record all of our meetings with Granola, and then I have used their MCP to sort of pull in on a daily basis, like the meetings that relate to my projects and what are the takeaways, and sort of like self updates. What is the most recent sort of thing that is important there? And then I have linear, which connects back to like the actual discrete sort of things that need to be done. And that sort of like trifecta of context is like really helpful as a starting place to create like a project and start talking to Claude about it. Um, I can sort of even show this too.
That's awesome. So yeah, building that repository of knowledge up front. Are there product managers at Monaco right now?
Yeah, we have four
Okay.
product managers and two
Okay.
designers.
Cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, that
Should I,
that would be awesome to dive into the workflow. Let's do it.
so let's see. We were talking about upstream process around how I've been using Cloud and my notes to sort of help me think earlier on and plan for stuff. So I have this Obsidian Vault that I call Work OS here, and basically it has this like ever growing graph of knowledge that I've been building around my work. And you can see here it's like,
So what does Obsidian do?
so Obsidian is uh, a tool that basically allows you to create a folder on your computer of markdown files. Markdown files are like the most basic version of ways to store a bunch of text. They're actually really, really good for LLMs to read through because they are formatted in a way that the LLMs can parse quickly. And so the two core aspects of the splitting that make it really useful is that one, it allows you to just show all of these markdown files and then create connections between these files. These are basically just links between each of these files, but in that simplicity, it means that you can basically build a knowledge graph of how these different things are related to each other. Just like each of these is like a note that talks about a particular aspect of how I'm thinking of the design. And then within each note, there's a bunch of connections to the prototypes I've done, any relevant other notes that are related to that. And so when you zoom out, it sort of visualizes into this like giant web of like how these things are connected.
Oh wow, that's cool.
This is a tool that people have been using for a long time. There's been like a big sort of second brain productivity push where people are like, you should, create a Zettelkasten of all of your notes, and so you can always go back and refer to them, connect them together. It's a very, very, very manual process of how people had done it before, and I think probably the reason why a lot of people just, after a while, just like their notes just became kind of dead. But with Claude, because it's so good at reading markdown files, you can basically let Claude manage this knowledge base for you by itself by giving it like a set of skills for like parsing through stuff that you give it that makes sense to either add to your vault or like don't actually feel like they can be enduring over time. It can connect the things that you've already written together, and it can like clean your sort of knowledge base so that only the things that are relevant matter. And so like you see here, here's some principles I've been building out around some of the projects I've been working on. And like some of them relate to me thinking about how canvas spatial design should be done. Each of these is sort of like an opinion about a part of how to design those things. Some of it is me just talking to Claude and it like pulling back notes into the Obsidian Vault. Some of it is I will have Claude do research on things in the background for me. Like I'll ask it like, what are the most common patterns? Basically, it's a self-perpetuating sort of loop, and I don't often actually go and look at the raw notes themselves. I am most often just in terminal talking to some live version of Claude, and because it has all of this context, it'll just like I don't have to ask it the same questions over and over again. It'll just like search using like a embedded search for anything that's related to what I'm talking about, and then I can just save so much time on what's the next step to do it on this thing. So like one example
Wow.
workflow here is I've been working on sort of like agent system within the product, and let's see, one of these versions. Basically, I had it had a meeting with the team. We talked about what works, what doesn't work. I had it pull out from Granola the things that were different from the direction I had before. And then I basically ask it to write like a spec of what are the differences in the new thing that we need to do. Uh, and then it'll go through and write a spec. Let me see if I have an example here. So I have this project called Burrows where I've been telling it over and over again. What's added? So this instance of Claude basically has my vault in its background context, and it also connects to whatever prototype I'm working on. So it has both contexts in mind. And I can ask it what's the most recent set of features that I introduced to Burrows. It'll do a semantic search on top of the vault via the MCP, and it'll read through all the files that like it's reading through the project files on Burrows here now. And I usually do this in like a container so I don't have to keep clicking at yes on permissions.
Yeah.
And so it'll basically tell me like, here's the most recent thing in the project. Here's the things that you had talked about but had not fully spec'd out that you want to work on. Do you want to go and like spec this aspect thing out here? Or we'll like have a back and forth on what that spec looks like. And then I'll put it in plan mode. It'll write a spec of that feature. And then if it requires design, I will ask it to output something into paper. So have you heard of paper before?
Yeah.
Yeah, paper has been like really useful. It's similar to Figma, but the core difference is that like everything that the AI is outputting via their MCP is actually directly in code. Like this is all auto layout, and everything is actually written directly as HTML, CSS, and so I can just ask it to design things for me. So here I've been having it basically do a lot of research on like with AI, the most basic feedback loop is just like the thumbs up, thumbs down, but no one really uses those unless it's like a really bad thing that the AI outputted, you know? And it's like, what are other patterns besides thumbs up and thumbs down that we can use for like feedback for the AI to figure out, is this something that I need to change only for this instance? Like if I'm editing something in a message and I change how I say like, dear Sarah, is this something that is just a change in the message itself? Or is this like a voice and tone thing where it's like, I always say dear instead of hey. And like next time you draft this message for me, just say hey, because that's how I talk normally. So like I've had like here it's showing this process of like, if I go from hey to dear, next time it just directly suggests that it's dear.
So are you predominantly using this as your main design canvas tool now versus Figma?
I think the way I think about it is that I still mostly will jump into Figma to move fast, just because I have so much muscle memory from using Figma for so long that I can put out something really quickly of like pretty decent quality just doing it in Figma. But I tend to find myself using it more for wireframing, where I'm just like putting together like what I think the layout or like the basic interaction is, and then oftentimes I'll paste it back in the cloud like a screenshot and be like, hey, this is what I'm thinking. And the way I'm using paper is kind of like the inverse. I think ideally I consolidate this just directly into paper, or if Figma, they recently released an update where their MCP is a lot more powerful, but I haven't had as much time to play with it. I originally was using it to like basically go in the application and they have like a way for you to screenshot certain things and it'll actually give you a frame with all of the actual components of the design. So if I just want to start somewhere where I'm making some like edits to an existing screen in the application, and I haven't like made that screen in Figma before, I'll just go and screenshot it, bring it into Figma, like, and just make some edits directly in Figma. But paper is really powerful when I'm just talking and thinking through stuff with Claude for it to visualize what we're talking about. And so, like here, I don't have the chat open anymore, but basically, I was asking it to think about outside of the thumbs up and thumbs down, what are the other patterns that are effective for the AI to get feedback from the user and actually make changes that are persistent and not just like, sometimes you click thumbs up and thumbs down, you give it feedback, and then it just goes into ether. You don't know how that feedback actually improved your
Yeah.
UX. Where it's like, here, what is a direct way we can tell the user, hey, we see you doing this thing a couple of times. Do you want us to change this thing for you the next time? And so I had it research how other products will do this. I talked through some of it, and I was like, just draw this for me. Let me see what this looks like. And so it drew a couple of different versions of how this feedback might look like. And I was like, put it into a flow. So then it built like flow one. You do these like steps here to how you might, like if you change hey to yo, every single time from now, we'll just say it the way that you normally say it. And then I was like, that kind of makes sense, but I would like to actually click through it and think through how that experience works. So I asked it to just create like a quick HTML prototype, uh, and it made this where it just basically took the stream screens, allowed me to be just make an edit, and then it's like, if I always say yo, I see the change here. I see that it now classifies that style. So the next time it writes the same sort of prompt, it'll just say yo by default. And we have some sort of visual tag here that says we learned this from your edits. I don't know if this is the right pattern yet. I think there's a lot to clean up here, but it like just being able to go from some ideas in text to some screens that it output in uh, here or in paper, and then from paper into something that's clickable within like 3 or 4 minutes makes it just like much faster to ideate on these things.
Yeah, absolutely. So is paper reading any of your like design system files to start from, or have you kind of just iterated on it visually as you go through?
I kind of have two different workflows. One is just basically open sky prototyping, where I don't really care about our design system that much. I just care about the interaction. I just care about like quickly getting to something that's clickable where I can see how these different things work together. The other is like if I actually am trying to build something that we're more likely to actually turn into something real. And then there are two ways that I approach it. One is that I basically have the entire design system on my computer pulled from Storybook, and I use that as a base whenever I spin up a new prototype. I just basically create like a new React app, and then it uses that as a starting place, and so it's visually more consistent with what we're trying to build. The second is that we have a tool that is using the Coder platform, which basically allows you to create a sandboxed space where you can pull in basically all of the app code, but spin up a version of Claude or Codex directly next to it, and then have it just make the edits in this container. So you can just have it unleash dangerously, skip permissions, give it a plan, and just basically have it execute on whatever you're trying to do. And then you can have like 5 or 6 tabs open, and that already has our design system built in. And so I often use that once I'm in a place where like the specs and the functionality are much more solid, and I basically have it create a prototype that is an extension of the application. So it's kind of a range.
Got it. Nice. Yeah. So at that point, once you're getting kind of closer to that maybe potential handoff stage where you're ready to kind of ship it into the product, what does that workflow look like from there? Like working with the engineer, and yeah, how do you kind of go to that kind of final? I think we need new words for these because it's not really a spec anymore. It's like like how do you kind of transition from like this design realm of prototyping and getting that like that example in paper to a place where that can be handed off to an engineer or some sort of other implementation method? Like what does that look like now?
I think it's a mix, and it depends on the scope of the work. If it's like a really complex interaction model with a bunch of different states, oftentimes I will hand them the prototype as sort of like the source of truth. And sometimes, if I have the time, I will push the prototype to something that's closer to something that can be directly handed off as code. And sometimes I just use it basically as like a spec where the prototype itself is like they'll have the written spec of how the functionality works. They'll have like I'll put some frames in Figma just for reference for them to quickly glance at. And then if they want to see how it actually works to click through these things and like what happens when X and Y Z happens, the prototype is sort of like I'm like refer to this for the state for all of these things. So sometimes if it's just like a quick fix thing, I'll just quickly throw it into Figma, give it to them. Or like the
Nice.
example I just showed of like a very small interaction, I'll just give them something like that and they can click through that. And like on the feedback thing, it's like everyone's talking about like the word of the year is agents, and everyone's like, I have an agent for everything. But it's like if the agent works well and it's just like this background thing that's perpetually looping, ideally it you don't have to go back and tell it how to improve itself. It's ambiently starting to improve itself. And I think that's where things like feedback inline, where like your actual engagement with it is the best way for it to learn, rather than thumbs up, thumbs down, what didn't work, what did work, and then just like
Yeah, that's a really good point. It's like implicit versus explicit. Like an explicit action would be like telling it thumbs up or thumbs down, but an implicit is just based on how you're using it. It's
yeah.
kind of intuitive in a sense. What do you think that the future looks like over the next 12 months in design, or things in your workflow that you think about like that are going to be solved over the next 12 months?
That's interesting. I think those are related but two separate questions. I think in terms of pain points, it's I think the two biggest pain points is like how do you still I hate the word taste, but how do you like still execute at a high level of interaction and visual design uh, with code with like AI, because it can very easily veer off and start doing like the AI purple gradients everywhere kind of thing. So like
Yeah.
making sure that it's outputting stuff that you yourself would actually output, I think is a challenge. And the second thing I think is like further upstream, how do you make sure you're balancing? I think there are a lot of potential novel interactions with AI that still is open sky to explore, especially integrating how these tools work, these non-deterministic tools that you can basically say anything work in like a systematic platform. So like mixing traditional UI with chat, where it's not just the chat box. It's like you can actually see the structure of how these things are organized in the UI. You have the benefit of like direct manipulation of the UI, and you have the chat. How do those interactions work? And are they actually better than just like chat or just normal UI interactions? I think is a space that people are still learning along with the agent stuff, and I think that's going to be like hard to figure out for designers because it's hard to prototype those things. It's like the old way is like I know in my head how many screens in Figma or whatever prototyping tool I'm doing. I can just basically like put together all the screens and just connect things together, and it represents some version of the flow. But because a lot of these experiences are so open ended, it's like it's hard to make. Like I can fake the funk with like a predisposed set of steps, but that's already biased towards like the only things you can do are the things that you've planned for. And the thing that's most interesting is to find the things that people do that you don't plan for. And so like that is a huge challenge in prototyping for designers, where I think you do have to like have enough technical skills, enough understanding of how AI works to be able to start doing that prototyping. So I think that is like something that you'll see people getting ideally much, much better at, is understanding the medium itself. Um, I think a third thing is that like technically anyone can just quickly put together a design with their Lovable or whatever tool they're using. PMs can quickly jot it together. A lot of these tools that make it faster for designers to design faster, like what I was telling you with Coder, also let the engineers just throw together a quick design, or let the PMs throw together a quick design. And it's like, okay, if design is mostly about the patterns that we already have, if you have a design system, and about functionality, then like engineers and PMs can do that maybe to like 80% of what the designer would do. And so it's like, where's the role that makes the designer still like uniquely valuable in the process? And I think it's around like, maintaining that level of knowledge of like how it all of these interaction models, what are the actual ones that make the most sense instead of what the AI thinks makes the most sense. It's a lot of like teaching the AI, like as a design partner, these are the things that work. And that goes back to why I've been investing a lot in sort of this knowledge vault. A lot of the knowledge vault is like a mix of what it's looking at from a industry standard, what are the most common patterns to do a certain thing, and what I think are the things that are the right choices to make. And so it's like this
Mm-hmm.
mix of my opinions and like a broader set of opinions. And I think that is a thing that only a designer can specialize into, that level of depth. And I think building that for designers, where it's like the more they add to it, the more they're able to just pull directly from it without having to over explain things, is like a really high leverage move for designers to do.
Absolutely. Yeah, you with your kind of experience going from researcher to working at one of the top agencies that I know of, Purple Rock Scissors, and being surrounded by designers who are really focused on craft, like very good visual designers. How and then this kind of new role, like you said, the lovables or the PMs or even the stakeholders in some cases are like prototyping these whole flows and things, and they're like, look how easy it is, but it's missing that like foundational craft in a lot of ways, and it takes a lot of massaging to get to that craft stage. And you mentioned taste. I know that's the buzzword right now, but taste is still important. But taste, is correlated to some subjective like craft outcome of it. Like how do you think about that now? Is like, getting to that level of craft still, maybe that 15% that you said the designers kind of fit into, because the roles are blurring quite a bit between like, do these ideas start with a PM? Does it start with engineers that has access to a design system that they can make very easy updates to it? Yeah, where does it go, and how does craft play a role in that future?
Yeah, I think that probably there are two things that stand out to me. One is that like I think it's actually easier to learn craft, to learn, I guess, taste. In my mind, taste is just like how you curate. What are the things that you think are actually good without like filtering out the noise? And then craft is like how do you actually use what you've curated in a way that's actually building something you're proud of, building something that actually delights the users and hopefully you as a designer. And I think that the old way to do this was to spend a lot of time in your tools, to learn Photoshop really well, to learn animation, 3D, all these things, and sort of just like brute force yourself into being a technical expert to be able to execute on the actual vision you have. And that's still true, but it's like much, much faster to do today than it was before, where it's like I can just quickly ask questions around like how do these things work? What's the different ways to approach it? Even like learning code has been like much much easier, where I can just have it explain things to me, or like why is this better than that, or like why did the engineer write this in a way that's better than how I wrote it, and like what can I learn from that, versus having to go ask them every time. That's been extremely useful to just quickly understand and build that tacit knowledge quickly. I think the second thing is around just like it's very easy, especially when you're working uh, for a company, to get lost in all the other things that are important. The actual, you have to ship this fast. You have to get this in front of users. It has to make, has to have impact. And so, like, only the designer can actually like be like, actually, we need to like spend some time making this like feel look nice, like actually put the craft into it. And I think it's an art to balance getting the time and focus to be able to do that well. And so going back to like the recursive like tooling, the more you can just like sort of automate the like first, second, third step of what you would have to usually start from a cold, like how do I start thinking about this as if it's an entirely new thing? If you can be on step five where you already have a bunch of background knowledge and examples and inspiration of like how other people are doing it well, by the time you get to it, you have like a great starting place. And I think that helps a lot with, instead of focusing so much on how do I think about the thing, it's like how do I make it much much better than what everyone else does. It's like a
Hmm.
different mindset than like, okay, what do I do starting off fresh every time?
That's really good. Yeah, absolutely. Totally agree with you. Yeah, so the Obsidian workflow and the building that knowledge base, like how far along are you in that journey right now? Like, is it working? What are the gaps in it? Like what do you how are you thinking about that right now?
I have around like 2,500 notes there now. I've been doing
Wow.
it for, it's actually like really impressive how much you can just have Obsidian sort of just like process things quickly for you. Like in the old world, it's like I have to think about how to frame this note. What are the things that are important to write about this thing? And I'll still do that for like the very high important things that are coming from my brain. But like I'll have it go research like some of these AI feedback patterns, and it'll look across it, and then we'll talk about it, and then I'm like, these things I think are really good, and then I'll have it not only prototype those things, but I'm like, all right, write these notes back to the vault. Like these are like patterns that I think we should like refer to next time we think about this thing. And so it goes back, it connects to all the other work I've been doing around AI. And so next time I'm working on like a different area, and then if I'm thinking about feedback, it can now pull from everything that I've done so far here as like a foundation. It can be like, this is what you thought about last time. Do you want to start here, or do you think there's a new way to do this now?
Nice. Yeah, I love that. I mean, yeah, like these tools are gotten so like you mentioned granola. I've been using that as well. It's so good. Like just to be able to have a conversation in a meeting and being able to organize just what people said in that way, that streamlined way. It's crazy. It's way better than going through the transcripts, or
Yeah.
trying to write your own notes on it. Um, so zooming up like higher level a little bit from like the executional stages of design, you mentioned scaling the team. How are you thinking about that? Like, you started as a startup, and then now scaling the team out. How are you thinking about scaling the design team, and where do they really like fit into the company structure overall?
Yeah. So I joined, I think I was the seventh employee to join. This was really early on. Basically, when I joined, there was no product. There was just like an idea of the product and a really like experienced founding team. And uh, I we brought on Stan, second designer. He's extremely experienced. He comes from Asana. He was a director there, and he balances sort of like a mix of like stakeholder management and IC work. And then him and I have worked together for the last year. It's been an extremely productive relationship, and we sort of like bounce back and forth between different areas of the product. Whoever has the most sort of like domain knowledge and our interest in that area has been really helpful. And so we both have like a very wide, expansive knowledge of like across the platform. How does the product work? What are the designs across these things? And it makes it really useful because we have so much domain knowledge on how the product works now that we can just move much faster. But the work is just increasing rapidly.
Of
Once you've
course.
launched a lot of new things that you got to build, and so we're looking for a third designer now. And so the thinking is that like I will probably shift to focusing more on AI specific features. I think there's a lot of interesting things to explore there. And then we'll bring on someone that's really focused on craft and like details, maybe closer to a design engineer, where they're working more on like the nitty gritty stuff. And then Stan will focus on like the bigger like feature sets that we need to do that just to make the tool at parity or better than just the basic sales platform that we're comparing ourselves against.
That's quite the transition, starting from a very small team and being able to get, that experience and building out a team and thinking, much higher level, just structure wise, process wise, in this new world of, these tools adapting so fast and just the definition of design is changing so quickly. Yeah, any like tips for other designers that are working on smaller teams? Any kind of learning lessons that you have there that you could pass on? Maybe they're founding teams or startups or smaller fractional designers where they're like fractionally working with companies.
Yeah, I think these are different roles. I think a designer should experience three things in their lives. They should experience working at a large tech company. They should experience being very, very early on a startup, and then they should experience sort of like freelance, whether it's fractional design or they're working across a wide range of things in a short time span. I think each of these is a very different workflow, and experiencing all three, I think, really helps designers be able to know when to move really fast versus know when to go further into like really making craft and beauty a thing. I
That's very good advice for sure.
I also think that like a lot of startups only bring in a designer once they've reached some sort of product market fit where like the base thing is valuable enough. Now they actually want to make the UX better. But being this early at a startup and then seeing other friends at other companies, even my friend Kyle at Anthropic, he was super early too, is just like design as a way to sort of be the product spec itself is way more valuable, I think, than just only having sort of things being driven by product management. I think that having that like equal focus on like, is this an actual good experience versus is just the useful and functional experience is a good, if you have like good PM partners, that's the best world where like they are really focused on thinking about like, let's make this really valuable for the customers from like a get them to actually get what they need out of the product thing. And then the designers focus on like, how do this, we make this experience like extremely seamless for that like set of features, and having that really early on in shaping how the product works is way more valuable than coming in like once you already have a working thing
Of
and then you're just
course.
sort of layering things on top. So
Yeah.
I would advise to do that. I think designers have to be really business minded. They basically have to understand how product management works, or else they're going to sort of only be focused on the pixels. So I think like
Yeah, dude, that's
building that.
such a good point. I mean, I feel like that's probably been my biggest battle working at corporate jobs is between that dynamic of decision making between product and design, you know? It's like that's probably where I clash with the most organizationally. Cuz I've worked with amazing PMs that are focused on the user, but they're focusing on the user, but they're also privy to the business metrics that it's trying to associate with, and they allow for that collaboration with design to they spend more time maybe framing up what the problems are and less time solutioning. And then I've been in organizations with PMs that are very solution oriented, process oriented, and those types of environments just tend to clash because they're just like, don't tell me what I'm not going to just like update this pixel, the screen based on this spec that you just made up. That's not rooted in anything, like I feel like that's always been my personal struggle.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's definitely a good point. And listening to I was listening to Lenny's podcast on the product, and I don't know where he sourced the survey from, but he was talking about this hiring of PM roles, and that's increasing. And design is kind of flat in a lot of ways, and that's an interesting thing. It's like, who's wearing the hats now? Like between those decision makings, and yeah, I feel like designers are better suited for that. If you have to decide between product manager and a designer, I feel like product designers that are more oriented in that problem solving space are going to be better suited for the future. I don't know if you agree with that, or what do you think?
So I had this experience where I was at Coda where we had this new PM come on, and usually, PMs will come in and look at the Figma file. They'll like review it. We'll sit together. And then one day I just caught him like making designs in my Figma file without asking me. I felt like I had a very visceral reaction to that experience. Or just like, what are you doing? Like UPM, I design it. And like there was some friction for a little while, but like as we worked together, we talked to him, like he was one of those like very solutions focused PMs where like he thinks in solutions, much like designers often do. But he brought a lot of levity to it because he was also thinking from a PM perspective. And it sort of made me realize that like uh, if you have a good PM, it's actually really like amazing to sort of have someone that's able to span the like spectrum of thinking about it in terms of a spec versus like actually playing with pixels. It can be really valuable. Like their ideas can be great jumping off points if you have someone that's willing to like jump into the solutions and not just like be like this is the best solution. It's hard to find. But my
Absolutely.
takeaway from that was like yeah, I think there is definitely an opinion amongst designers that is like, I'm not interested in the business. I'm not interested in the money. I want to make like things look really great. And it's like that works well for certain like brand designers or maybe freelancers who are specialized because of their craft. But if you're working in an early startup, like the business is like the most important thing. So it's like the best thing you can do is to learn to also sort of understand the business the way that a PM would understand it. Just like, and then it's like I feel like PMs actually appreciate when designers are able to do that versus like designers get angry when like PMs are jumping into solutions. And I think a lot of times that's rightfully so because they're just like pushing their opinions. But there is like a world where like designers can do both and PMs can do a little bit of both. And then I don't think these roles need to be so separated. I think the ideal role
100%.
is someone that is able to span both.
Absolutely. Yeah, and if you're working closely with them, that just tends to naturally happen where, maybe you uncover an insight we're seeing. And if everyone's aligned to that together, then it becomes a much more collaborative process on the outcome itself. And whoever came up with the idea, it doesn't really matter. Whoever like spec'd it to the design, details doesn't really matter. It's like you are all aligned on the same problem together. And that just tends to feel more as a team, and it just feels more supportive because you're on the same team and you're solving the same problem together, and that outcome you're all reward, you're all gain from that, whatever you ship, and you all feel good about it. Yeah, I
Yeah.
totally agree. I think that yeah, the whole changing lanes and definitions of the roles, and yeah, it seems to be, I don't know, especially in a startup, I'm sure those lines have been blurred so much. I'm a fan of that. I like to see that change. I don't think that hard definitions should ever be intact. Whoever is a problem solver and a creative problem solver, those are the ones that are gonna like thrive in the next era of what we do.
Yeah. We had like a thing we were working on recently. Our PM was working on it, and then they went on vacation with their family for a little bit. There's some parts of the thing that weren't fully fleshed out, and then the backend engineer was working on like a tech design to build it, and he just like had a bunch of questions that weren't answered, and so he just started creating meetings where we basically fleshed out the spec as we went, and he basically was effectively sort of like PMing the project because he needed to like figure out what needed to be done on the back end. And it felt refreshing that like he was thinking about like the UX. He was thinking about like, do we need to consider these things that are like related to these things but might be out of scope? And it's just like it doesn't really like anyone should be able to jump into that position and push things forward just to get the job done.
For sure. Yeah, man, 100% agree. Maybe dive into more of the work, but yeah, anything else that you want to cover?
I'll talk a little bit more about the workflow then, I guess. So like we talked about uh talked about Obsidian as sort of being the base. So on top of that, I basically have three ways to interact with the different AI that I'm using to do stuff. One is the active Cloud Code sessions where we're working directly in the vault and with some sort of prototype. The second is I have two agents. So you've heard about like all the open cloud stuff that everyone's like super in love with now. There is another open source platform called Hermes that is building like a much better version of OpenClaw, in my opinion, in that it doesn't do everything and not everyone is using it, but it's like really, really good at orchestrating itself. It's really good at this feedback loop where if you tell it certain things to do, it's able to execute on them and then review its own work and then suggest its own changes to what it's doing.
How is it set up?
Yeah, it's running on my local machine. I have a Mac Mini that I like everyone else, is repurposed for the agent stuff. I have two agents on there. Hermes is one of them, and basically, the computer is entirely set up for Hermes to use. It has its own sort of like email address. It's able to use web browser and other such tools. It's not connected to my data directly, so it can't like go and ruin my world. And I use Obsidian Sync, and so all the notes that I have on this computer are synced to my phone and are synced to the other computer, and so it can look at the vault. And there, I have a page in the vault that is basically for Hermes to like look at like things that I think I want it to look into more. And so there's nothing on it now because it actually went through everything. So like I was saying, there's this page here just called Hermes status, and what it does is it'll look at this page. It'll look at if there's anything that I still have open questions on or that I don't think I've thought about enough. It'll go and research each of these things, and then it'll come back and look at, is this something worth adding to the vault? Like, is this new knowledge, or is just like this is repeating something that I already know? So this is like a session history of like every time it's added something to it. But this page in the vault is basically like its home screen, home place to go, where it'll look like anything that I am interested in. And then every night, every 30 minutes, it'll go and research that topic. And then in the morning, it comes back and then it proposes all of the like things that it learned into a capture file under captures here, under Hermes. And then when I go and process the notes, I can be like, this is useless, or this is something that dumb that it created, or this is actually really useful and I should add it to what I'm already thinking. And it just does that ambiguity in the background for me. And so
Wow.
when I wake up, it's just like it's done some additional thinking beyond what I've already done. And it helps sort of create this like loop where it's like, in the best use cases, it's able to allow me to think about something that I wouldn't have thought of myself from a different angle. And it gives me other perspectives to do these things. The other thing that's really helpful is like when I'm in a session, I have a bunch of tools to just start a session.
I'm really personally enjoying using the terminal with Claude. I feel like it's so accessible now, than it was before. Terminal was always like a scary thing for designers, I think. It's like, what am I doing? But Claude has made it feel like a natural chat experience.
Yeah. And Warp has worked really well. And so I will either use Terminal directly here, or there is a plugin within Obsidian for me to use Terminal directly in there if I want to see the notes themselves. And then if I'm doing multiple sessions, I'll use this other terminal called CMUX. And basically, the benefit of this tool is that I can, if I have like 4 or 5 agents running on something at once, I can just have them in the sidebar here, and each of these tabs can be like a different thing that it's doing, so I can orchestrate it much better. Versus like in Terminal, it's just tabs across the top, which if you're doing a bunch of stuff can be like really, really like draining to figure out what's the right tab that I was doing this one thing in. And then one further extension of that is this tool called Conductor here, and this basically creates like a work tree within a project where I can have multiple agents working on different parts of the prototype at once, and they understand what the other ones are doing together, so they don't like overwrite each other's code or create like all these like conditions where it'll break the prototype. So I can like parallelize a lot of the work once I flushed it out, and it makes it prototyping much faster.
Oh, wow. So you have the agents working on separate parts of a prototype?
Yeah. So basically, what I'll start out with is like this agents one. I'll have 3 sort of chats going on. I'll have one called agents design. And this is the one I was telling you about where I'll iterate on like, what am I thinking on the design layer? And then once I get to a good place, I'll tell it to write I'll go into plan mode and I'll tell it to write a spec for how I would prototype this. And then I'll have it like basically keep iterating on the spec until it's like good. And then I'll give that spec to this dev agent. And this agent basically reads the spec and actually starts executing the code. But if I'm doing multiple streams of this, you tell this dev agent to like break this down to like 4 or 5 chunks that individual agents can do. And then I'll switch to this conductor tool here, and I'll give each of these like Beirut, Khartoum, like each of these will be a section of like the larger spec, and they'll run in parallel together.
Wow. That's really cool. How do you stay on top of all this with all the knowledge base that you're building, and like how do you distinguish the signal out of the noise? It seems like sometimes it's like informational overload, right? Like how do you parse through that?
I read this really good thought piece a couple of weeks ago, and it's basically talking about like how time has gone from actually focusing on like time of day for when you were a farmer and like you had to wake up at a certain time and go to sleep at a certain time because you only had so much sunlight, to really be more about productivity, to like making it like when you're in that focus state, like you actually don't have any real perception of time. And they were saying that like the workflow right now with AI is like the 10x multiple of that flow state, where you're not really in the same flow state anymore. You're kind of like, those Japanese bullet hell games where it's just like your
Hmm.
little fighter at the bottom and you're like shooting like missiles everywhere, trying to kill everything. And it's like way too much for anyone to actually understand what's going on unless they're like super dialed in. That's what it feels like to work with AI these days, where you have 20 different things going at once. If you have ADHD, this is like the hardest thing to even do, is just like figure out what's going on. And sometimes I do get lost in the sauce, but it's like expected, right? So it's like to manage those things, I think it's just like what I'm doing here. For simple things, I'll start in the terminal, or I'll start in like Cloud's native app in their co-work tools. And then as I scale, if I see myself creating more instances of Claude to address the same thing that I'm thinking about, then I'll
Uh-huh.
move to a more complex tool like the CMUX tool here, or like Conductor, where I can like parallelize things. And like in this view, I can just see like everything in under agents prototype, if I spin up a bunch of them, is all related to this like one thing that I'm working on. And this view makes much easier to sort of just like have everything running. I can have like 4 prototypes running at once and still keep on top of the things that I'm trying to focus on. uh, so I think the long story to me is like when I start, I usually try to start simple within some sort of terminal where it's like single thread. And the more threads I create, the more I feel the urge to move to a tool that specializes in that
Hmm.
parallelization. Parallelization.
Yeah, yeah, that's awesome, man. This workflow is quite incredible, just to be able to like build that knowledge base and have multiple agents running on the same thing. It's like almost like that's the skill set in itself now, right? Is being
Yeah.
able to manage all of these things as if they're like almost little employees, like you're building a team uh, of you know AI agents that are outputting all of this for you.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah, that's cool.
There are like some cool skills. So have you built any cloud skills yourself?
Not yeah, no, like prompting for the Claude skills, building out their own. No, I haven't. I've given it specific skills to learn as I'm prototyping, but I haven't like built out like a knowledge base of specific skills before I start. But should
Yeah.
I?
Yes.
Okay.
That's like the knowledge base has been super useful for me to like if I'm doing something over and over again, I'll just ask it to like create a skill. And because it has context of like how I did that thing in the chat already, it can be like, okay, so here's like a template of like how you seem to be doing that thing. Like for instance, I was using it to create we've been doing a lot of billboard ads, and a lot of it's just like print design stuff, just like specking it out using the right colors, blah blah. So I've just automated that process where I just have it create like an AE script with like all the right like borders and everything for me, so I can basically just drop things in and export them directly. I was doing that manually for like a week, and then I was just like, you see me struggle through this for a week. automate this for me. And I created this skill where it just like automatically generates that script, and then I can just export it with the same sort of settings every time now. I think like the superpower that this gives designers is like you can just create your own little tools, your own little skills, your own little like ways of how you do things that are, they can pull from a wider template, but you can quickly personalize them to things that you need them to do super fast.
That's awesome. That's a really good example. So how do you think about building the skills like that in that case where you see something that you're doing maybe in the workflow that's redundant over and over and over again, and what's the course of action to build that skill in Claude? So
Uh,
obviously it memorizes it from the previous conversations and prompts, but yeah, the what are the actual skills, like how do you actually do that?
so I've built up a nice collection of skills that are a mix of like skills that come from other tools. Like Figma has their own set of skills that work with their MCP. Um, these are project skills here. These are like examples of things that I've either pulled directly from what someone else has created. Like these GSAP ones are specific for animation. Graph is specific. These are all things that I've just riffed on from other people. And then there are other skills here, like this section here. There's provoke, quiet, Ralph, reflect, remember, review. These are all just things to help manage the knowledge base that I've built, where it'll just, if I just do a string of these skills, it can like go through and delete all the things that no longer matter in this vault that I have. It can go back and connect things to new things that I've added quickly. So this chunk here is like just like automating that sort of knowledge management step. So this chunk here is a lot of like things that I've just created, like codex review. So I'll every time I have a plan that Claude creates, Claude is really good at creating plans. It sometimes it easily misses like code issues that it should take into consideration. So I'll just have Codex go and review every plan that Claude makes and be like, hey, this thing you pointed at the wrong part of the code, or this thing doesn't actually exist. And then it'll like rewrite the plan. So I have like Claude and Codex working in this like cycle together where and until Codex is like happy with the actual code implementation, it'll just keep telling Claude to rewrite it. And that saves me tons of like debugging up front.
Wow,
Um,
that's interesting. So you're running ChatGPT's Codex model to do code reviews on Claude's code, essentially.
yeah, yeah. So I have three skills that I use really commonly. One, I think it's called stress test. It's in here somewhere, but it basically takes like the opposite view and basically like argues against everything that a plan suggests. Like this, why would this not work? Why would this not work? And then gives an outline of things that it needs to think about more. And then Claude will go back and rewrite the plan with these new considerations. And so that makes in the planning phase it really fast at catching things that it should have caught before it starts executing. Once it's written the code, I'll have it do the codex thing where now codex will go and actually review the code and then tell all the things that it messed up or didn't do right. And then that'll come back and give like a follow-up plan to go fix those things that Cloud will then make because it has context of the first plan, it has
Hmm.
context of the code now. It just makes it much cleaner and it stops it from potentially like going doing weird Cloud stuff. Because Codex is like not fun to talk to, but it's really good at code.
Yeah, yeah it does seem like they have different personalities between the
Yeah,
two.
yeah.
That's awesome. So is this predominantly like in the prototyping stage of the project? How close are you to the production build with some of these skills that you've built?
Most of the time, because there are a lot more engineers and designers, I try to stay away from building something that actually gets shipped just because we don't need that right now. I've done.
Sure.
There's a couple of features where I really wanted them to be in the product, and so I just basically did it myself, and then like got reviews on those things. And in those instances, I'm actually just directly using Cursor in the code base, where Cloud. I have the context and like the planning from Cloud, but I actually execute in a way where I'm actually looking at like what the output is, and like I usually use the instances where we're using the coder tool that I was talking about that the
Mm-hmm.
engineers use for actual coding. I think those just like that feels like a very more that's a very different sort of like thought process to like actually try to make something that is shippable versus something that is just like, let me show you like how this works, let me basically give you like a living spec.
Yeah. Is the design at least close to production? Like how close is it to the actual production of the front end?
When I'm using the sort of coder instance, then it's like one to one because it's pulling directly from our design system. When
Okay.
I'm sort of just like trying things out, I basically have a base prototyping kit where it is pulling from our design system, but it's not forcing it to strictly adhere to it. It's using it more as a reference. And so,
Okay.
depending on like how new the patterns are, sometimes they will look very, very different. Sometimes they will look like a derivative version of whatever we have in the product. But in my mind, it does like until something feels like it's something we actually want to do, it matters less to me that it fits within how the visual system works. Once it's like we definitely should do this, then like I'll go back through and usually try to clean it up. Or the engineers will just like that. I know what he's thinking with that pattern. I don't need to like give them the one to one with those things.
Nice. Yeah. That's awesome. I love that. Building the context, giving the engineers exactly what the interactions are, like how it should function, and then allowing them to implement it how they seem fit.
Yeah, yeah. Actually, I have one more thing I just remember I wanted to show.
Yeah.
Uh, I'll just share it real quick.
Okay, cool.
This was one of the so one of the projects that I've been toying around with is this idea of like instead of doing things directly in chat, having the canvas do it. I think canvases are really great for like divergent thinking and sort of going wide. So I've been playing around with like building this personal tool where it pulls from that code, the vault that I was talking about here, and I can ask any question about things that I've been sort of exploring, and it'll basically just like if I click on something that I've explored before, it'll break down each of the like individual notes and how they're connected to each other. Visually, definitely needs some polish, but this basically allows me to like read through this and click, each of these links opens up into like another branch, and so I can kind of like go really wide. And then the left over here, basically, this text here is like very detailed. I can tell it to like make it super concise in just one sentence and explain it to me like either I already know about this in detail or like I know nothing about this. Like write this to me like I'm like a 5 year old instead of like the level of difficulty that you have there. And this has been like really interesting the last week and a half exploring this way of just like following, basically rabbit holing on things in a visual way where I can just ask like, each node a question about that topic, and then after a while I can just create this giant like mind map of how I explored things, and then I can feed this back to the AI, be like, this is how I was thinking about this thing, and it will just take all of these lines and just create the connections back in my notes.
Whoa, that's cool. So you just vibe coded this as your own side project?
Yeah.
Nice. That's awesome. So and that's updating real time, like off of your notes. It's
Yep.
pulling that. Wow, that's really cool.
So
That's
I'm gonna
awesome. Are you gonna release that product as your own thing?
I might put it out there for other people to play with. I don't think I would like actually try to productize it. I think it's just one of those things where it's like it's been really interesting to think about other ways to think about how you're exploring information.
The costs essentially are almost zero to be able to like build software now, for yourself, and even building your own tools or that solve one specific problem is really interesting. Yeah, it's great. It's thanks for sharing that. That's cool.
Yeah.
Do you have a link to that
Not
where
yet,
people
but
can? Okay.
when I push it a little further, I'm happy to share it out.
Okay. Cool, man.
This
Yeah,
was
I'll add to it in the notes whenever it's available.
yeah, cool.
Well, cool, man. Well, have a great day. Thank you again for sharing your story and your background and insights and how you work. And I appreciate it and hope to see you soon in person.
Yeah. Let me know when you're here. We'll go grab some food. We'll go out in the park and we'll hang out.
Awesome, man. Sounds good. Thanks so much, Tommy. I hope you have a great day and talk to you soon, man.
See you, Cameron.
All right.